Hello and welcome back to Take a Knee with Mike and JD. I am JD,
And I'm Mike.
and we're going to be talking about Week 1 of the 2022 NFL season. It was a really strange week, to say the least, especially the Sunday games. There was a lot of competitive games. A lot of games were kept close. If any team was winning, the other team usually made a comeback. Obviously, there was a ton of missed kicks. There's some big injuries. So I guess what we'll start out with is, since you're a Packers fan, I'm a Steelers fan, we'll review both of our games. How did you think the Packer game went? What you like, what you didn't like? How was your impression of Game 1 for the Packers?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a pretty crazy game, and I'm glad we're recording this a few days later because I've kind of reflected a bit. I think my live reactions, directly after, wouldn't have been beneficial to anything.
Oh, same here. Yeah, had we done afterward? I mean, I didn't have a voice after that game, So
yeah,
I think we should at 1 week record right after the games end and see we'd be just so emotional about it.
it would be. Let's wait until well, at least until the Packers are doing a bit better till we do that. But yeah, look, I mean, it was a crazy week in general, and it was pretty typical of a week one for a lot of teams, and it's one of those ones where picking week one is crazy. And I think as a fan of any team, if you I mean, especially if your team's gone bad, but even if they have gone, really well, you can't take too much out of week one. It's just so lopsided, and I mean, I think the reason for that is because a lot of teams, don't play their starters or play
Right.
their starters very minimal in preseason. So this is really their first game, and really, I think that is a large part of the issues that the Packers had is that, and this seems to happen every year. This same thing happened last year against the Saints. They play no preseason with their starters. They come out and they just look awful. They look like they've met each other for the first time. Rodgers always has uncharacteristic interceptions. Is fairly inaccurate for him at least. And it was yeah. I don't understand that. I don't understand at least not playing like your starters in the third pre-game, and it's one of those things where and you see the teams that did play their starters all played a lot better, and to me it's just throwing away week one. It's basically saying, well, we're just going to take the loss in week one because we don't play our starters. But
Yeah.
to me, I don't understand that because you need to have reps. And I know that, the whole thing is, well, injuries and stuff, but injuries happen. Injuries happen at training, Injuries, as we've seen in the first round, injuries happen week one. So what is the difference? Looking at some of the big injuries like TJ Watt and that, if he had played, not that I think, not playing applies here, because I don't think the Steelers were too affected by that, especially not to the level of the Packers. But, I mean, if TJ Watt went out and played, in the preseason game 3 and did his pec then, well, what's the difference? But I think the thing is, I think the league will start, more teams start playing their starters, and because of this. But what will happen is a big name will get an injury, and all of the analysts will say, "Oh, see, this is why you don't play your starters," all this. But it is what it is.
It has seemed like more recently teams will, with their veteran players, just be like, it seems like they just go, do you want to play? And if they don't, they'll also make the decision. But yeah, over the last 5 years, there have been such a change to, we're just going to play these guys that are competing for a spot where, I mean, I remember early 2010s, I mean, besides one game, your starters were in there for at least half of the game, so
Yep.
Even if you do play your starters, there's a good chance your opponent isn't. So your first team offense is probably playing against second, third string defenses and vice versa. So I think like you said, what would have been the difference for TJ Watt had he tore it in game 3 of the preseason game 1? I mean, obviously, I don't think the Steelers would have won Game 1 without T.J. Watt at least playing the majority of that game. But it is really weird, and you saw that in the Packers game. There were drops. I think there was a lot of sort of messy mistakes. And like that big drop, was it Christian Watson, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he had that huge, just would have walked into the end zone, and he just dropped it.
Yeah, and it was one of those, and we look at it. I think the Vikings played well. I think they played much better than I expected. I think the revamped offense under Kevin O'Connell. Like, yes, it's only one game, but early signs are fantastic. But I think the Packers beat themselves in multiple aspects, and I think it was a real sliding doors game, which is most NFL games. But the Vikings come out, they have a good first drive. Our first drive, there's that massive drop from Watson, but if he catches that and scores a touchdown, I think it's such a different game because because you could see the next few drives, Rodgers went right into his shell with his throws. He wasn't doing anything deep.
No confidence at that point.
No confidence. Yeah. He wasn't targeting any of the rookies. So the whole offense was predictable because you pretty much know if it's a throw, it's going to be going to Jones or Tonyan. So it changed. It changed that. And then on top of that, because if we get that score, instantly Minnesota play different on defense. They can't clamp down like they did. They know they've got to cover the top, but and because Watson is really the biggest, he does have that speed where he can take that top off. And if he can work on his those drops, and hopefully that was a one-off, it's going to be a big difference. But he catches that. It's 7-7. Minnesota play different. It's that kind of thing. But and the other thing was why Jair wasn't shadowing Justin Jefferson. I don't know. I don't understand that. That is a bad call. And I've heard some of the reasoning was that Joe Barry, because obviously if you take one of your corners out to shadow their best player, it puts more strain on the other defensive backs. But I think there are some receivers you just need to do that on.
Right, it's Justin Jefferson. At some point you have to sacrifice giving up catches to, Adam Thielen obviously isn't a lesser receiver, but Justin Jefferson, you need to give people the help over the top with him, because you saw many times he was just wide open. Nobody was near him. He just lost his cornerback, his DB that was covering him, because he's so good at running those routes and so fast that without help, he just gets away.
Yeah, and Alexander is that kind of player. He can blanket the receiver. You can just take it. Justin Jefferson's elite. So even with that, he is probably going to get away a few times. But for the most part, you could go, Alexander's on him. We can focus on the rest, and then that has the bonus effect of we now know where most of their balls are going because Jefferson is pretty much out of the play. So. And it's not like the other backs are slouches. That's what I also don't understand the reason about. Savage, Amos, these guys, they're great players. It's not like Alexander's the one experienced dude and the rest are rookies and we need to give them all the help we can. That's not the case. I think it was a complete misstep by Joe Barry and Barry, and to not adjust. After the first couple of times Jefferson burnt, to not go, okay, guys, we need to lock him down. I think it was a big mistake, but I don't think that's I don't think it's season over type stuff. I think
no. What was funny is on the Pat McAfee show today, Aaron Rodgers was like, "At least we scored more points than last year's Week 1." They scored 4 more points than last year, so that's a step up at least.
Yeah, it is, and I think there's a lot of factors in there, but yeah, their execution was awful, and I think that's what it comes down to. A lot of those stuff, the players were right, the routes were run correctly, but just execution was awful on both sides of the ball. So I think that's all I want to say about that one.
Well, I guess just to then transition to the Steelers game, it was a fun game it was fun and frustrating to watch.
Well, it was frustrating to me because I missed the first two drives of the Packers and Vikings game because ESPN wouldn't swap over until your guys stopped missing field goals.
Well, it was what was really gave me confidence is our defense, especially with getting most of our defensive linemen back from last year, getting Miles Jack in the middle of that 3-4. The defense played great, and like we said, playing people in the preseason, Joe Burrow didn't play at all in the preseason, and I understand he had a surgery, he had an appendectomy, and so obviously he couldn't play. They didn't want to, for medical reasons, not play him, but his first throw, Minka Fitzpatrick made a great play on a ball where he was behind the wide receiver, and since Joe didn't really put that much zip into the ball, Minka just went right over the receiver and took it in for a walk-in pick six. I mean, that was a great way to start the Steelers season because prior to that, on the first play, Cam Hayward comes up with a huge sack. So the first two plays for the Bengals were all negative. And we obviously, we technically picked Joe Burrow off 5 times. It was 4 official. The fifth one that I'm talking about is he got strip sacked and the ball flew up in the air and Cameron Hayward caught it on the fly. So it was a fumble, but he was about to throw the ball. But what was so frustrating is the defense played so great, but the offense couldn't stay on the field. So that's what really allowed the Bengals to come back in the second half was, one, there was coaching errors, which I'll get to, but also the defense was just gassed. They were out there for the majority of the game. They would take takeaways. They would intercept. They would recover fumbles, and the offense would go 3 and out or just a few plays. Or if they got a ball, right down into Bengals territory, it'd be a field goal attempt. So, had the Steelers' offense been better, that game's not close at all. The Steelers, had they converted more of those into touchdowns, it would have been 28-35 to 17, maybe 10. So that's what was really hard to watch, especially with our offensive line. They did give Mitch time to throw, so their pass blocking was a lot better than their run blocking. Their run blocking was atrocious. Najee Harris kept getting hit a yard or two in the backfield before that was first contact. He had no clean holes. I think he had one run of maybe like 8 or 9 yards. Chase Claypool was our leading rusher because they use him on those jet sweeps all the time. Yep. So had our offense not gassed our defense, that game doesn't go to overtime. But like I said, the defense played great. There were unfortunately a few bad penalties that allowed the Bengals to get down to the 2-yard line. Minka Fitzpatrick had a penalty in the end zone, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. And he also almost got penalized on the very next play because he hit the wide receiver again and walked over to the ref and put his hands out and he told Pat McAfee today, or on Monday, was that clean? Which you don't do to the refs because they'll flag you for unsportsmanlike conduct. So when I saw him do that, I was like, no, please don't do that. But luckily he didn't get a flag. But he played great, and what was nice is because we have more better linebackers, he's actually able to play his safety position. So you see him back there how good and talented he is, where he was just making plays, interceptions. He blocked that extra point. I could not believe that he got, he went untouched through the line and got there just in time. I know the snap wasn't the best, but without his speed and his instinct, that the game's over. That extra point is probably good. So it just, the offense really let me down. Mitch Trubisky he obviously led them to a win in overtime, but it was really some Hail Mary throws that the wide receivers made really good plays on. That was more than him actually making good throws. There were a lot of throws during the game that he was underthrowing balls. He was throwing balls out to the sideline. They do a lot of button routes with Deontay Johnson, and those balls got to be out just before the wide receiver turns around. He wasn't doing that. If he was throwing it, 2 yards away from the wide receiver. So I wasn't very impressed with Mitch. I was okay actually having a QB that could at least move slightly other than Big Ben, because when the pocket did collapse, which was rare, he was able to at least move around. But if their offense gets it together, this team should be pretty good. But unfortunately now they're going to miss TJ Watt for probably a minimum of 8 weeks. The last I heard was they don't think it was a full tear, but still that's a big injury, especially for a guy who the majority of his moves are pushing the lineman back or spinning. Like, you obviously need your arms in order to do that. So that really sucked.
Yeah, and you don't want to rush him back either.
No, you really don't. If it's if it's him missing 9 games but coming back fully healthy, or rushing him back in 6 and then losing him for the rest of the year, I'd rather let him get fully healthy. Alex Highsmith has been getting better and better each year, but it's who are they going to get to replace TJ right now, which is going to unfortunately be something we don't want to think about, because he's one of the most elite defenders in the NFL right now. But the other big issue that I had on the last drive the Steelers had in regulation, they could have wasted about a minute more of the clock. But unfortunately, on second down, for some reason, they decided to throw the ball and not run it, so that the Bengals had to use their timeouts. They threw the ball on second, and it got batted down, which stopped the clock, which allowed the Bengals to save a timeout. And unfortunately, then Najee Harris gets hurt, so then we have to use a timeout under 2 minutes. So there was barely any time off the clock when the Steelers made a great fourth down stop at the goal line. I think it was a terrible coaching decision to throw the ball. You want to have the Bengals, if you're not going to convert that third down, you want them to waste their timeout to save clock. And had Najee not gotten hurt, and had we not thrown the ball, there would have been less than a minute left, and the Bengals would have no timeouts. We let them keep a timeout, and we gave the ball back to them with like 90 seconds left instead of 40 or 50, which proved to be the dagger. Luckily Minka came up and made that big extra point block. And then in overtime, just a story about the overtime. So I'm sitting there, we're watching it. The Steelers don't do anything with the ball. The Bengals drive down. Evan McPherson misses a 29-yard field goal. It wasn't tipped. I thought it was tipped at the line, but it was just a bad snap, and it sort of got him all out of whack, and he pulled it. The Steelers drive down, and Chris Boswell is one of the best clutch kickers in the game. A lot of the times, people still see him as a bad kicker because he had one bad season. His 2017 was awful. He was missing kicks; they were getting blocked. But outside of that, he has a 92% field goal rate, and his field goals out at 50 or more yards, he's like 18 of 23, which is crazy. That field goal, unfortunately, he just knuckled it, and it dunged off the post. It looked good, and then it just went off. The Bengals then drove. At that point, I had to go get a haircut because it closed at 5, and this is about 4:30. So I went, okay, the Bengals are getting the ball back at midfield. I'm going to go get my haircut. I drive down there. I'm sitting there getting my haircut. And about 10 minutes later, my phone is just nonstop buzzing. And I knew that meant something good had happened, because my brothers wouldn't text me 50 times in a row had they lost. They would have just said they lost, and that's it. But my phone just buzz with text messages. And so I get done with my haircut, I look at my phone, and it's just, they won. Chris Boswell, 53-yard field goal. So it was a roller coaster of a game. It really was. It was. I shouldn't get too wound up during games, but it's kind of like an emotional release, from pent-up frustrations from work or what have you, to sort of pour that into a game. So it actually does feel good to yell about the game. But, at least they won. Like I said, we both picked them to win. I thought that they would get their revenge on the Bengals, and they really did. And that game should have been a laugher. It really should have. They should not have allowed that game should not have been as close as it was for the Bengals to have two opportunities to win it. But we're 1-0. We're coming against New England at home. Mac Jones has a back injury, so we'll see how he plays. But the Patriots didn't play too well down in Miami. But
no, I think the Patriots are in trouble. And one of these, as I said at the start, I don't think there's any point overreacting, to losses or wins because it's week one. But I think there are some teams that are definitely in trouble for the rest of the season from week one, either through injuries or through, they probably aren't the teams maybe we and others thought they were.
Yeah, the big ones would be, I think, teams that need to play better would obviously be the Cardinals. They got blown out against the Chiefs. You expect that game to be closer than it was, but the Chiefs made that game a laugher, 4 drives into the game. And the Cardinals really only scored 21 points because it was just garbage time near the end. The Chiefs weren't really playing defense. The Raiders and Chargers had a really good game. I'm not worried about the Raiders. The Packers should be able to bounce back. The Cowboys looked really bad, and they're a team that should be worried now that, speaking of injuries, Dak Prescott had surgery on his throwing hand, and he should be out about 6 to 8 weeks, I think, or 6 to 10 weeks, somewhere in there. So, like I said...
So I got just on that, I got a question for you on that, because there's differing reports, 6 to 8 weeks, which that sounds reasonable to me, but, Jerry Jones coming out saying that they're not going to put him on IR because he's back sooner.
Right.
And then McCarthy saying, I've basically got a list of every available quarterback, which I'm looking through at the moment. So obviously someone's not telling the truth there, but I would be assuming the coach would be more across it than, Jerry would be. And also Jerry, has business interests in making it sound like...
Right. The team is still on track.
Sooner.
Yeah.
But with my question, with how, outside of the injury, with how the Cowboys played, would you be wasting a draft pick to go and, get a Ryan Fitzpatrick or someone that's sitting out there? Or I think Mason Rudolph has been tossed up as a possibility too. Or would you just be saying this isn't going to be the year?
You saw when Dak broke his ankle a few years ago, where the Cowboys, they were pretty good, and without Dak, they were just a really bad team. And like I said in our preseason summaries, he was the best QB in that division, and with them, they're the favorite to win the division. Now it's Philadelphia that I think has a really great opportunity now to win that division. But I think Jerry Jones is lying. Obviously, if he's had surgery on this isn't his non-throwing hand, this is his throwing hand. He needs to grip the ball and throw it and hold on to it when he gets sacked. So I think it would be a poor decision to not put him on IR, because you're losing a roster spot by doing that, by just holding on to an injured player. And I get the idea of, well, if we don't do that, he can come just back at any point, whereas with the IR, there's stipulations that he can come back with. I think they're going to look into, I think the big names, they may try to get Jimmy Garoppolo, but I don't, that's the big name that people are talking about. Like I said, I think Mason Rudolph, he's expendable from the Steelers, obviously, so he shouldn't cost the Cowboys that much, probably a mid to late round pick. I don't think he fetches anything. Highest, I think Mason Rudolph would catch them as a 3rd round pick, but I think that would be an extreme. I think he'll probably, if they do trade for him, it'd be about a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. But the QBs that they have right now are Cooper Rush and Will Grier. Do they trust those players to lead them? And you saw how poorly they played. I mean, the defense played okay. They bent and not broke with Tom Brady. They stopped them from scoring touchdowns and only kicking field goals. And so they did give the Cowboys an opportunity to win, but the offense just did nothing. And with Dak Prescott back there, they didn't do anything. So how well are these other QBs going to go? So my picks would be Internally, apparently they're going to go with Cooper Rush, but externally, I think the top two would be Jimmy Garoppolo or Mason Rudolph. I don't know if the 49ers trade Jimmy Garoppolo after how Trey Lance played this week. He didn't play great. Now, you could attribute that to him playing in a monsoon in Chicago where you could barely run and it was downpouring. So I think they want to wait one more game. Maybe not one more game, but they want to see a couple more games of Trey Lance before they consider moving on from Jimmy Garoppolo, because that's the whole reason they restructured his contract and not traded him, is because they wanted a backup option if Trey Lance struggled early in the season. So,
well, that's exactly the point. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo would cost you way too much.
Right now, yes, he would cost you a lot compared to any other
because,
option.
For both reasons. Like, San Francisco aren't going to give him up unless you make them an offer they can't refuse, because, Trey Lance didn't look great. But on top of that, even if Trey Lance looked great, they made a decision thinking that Trey Lance was the guy, and they still decided to keep Jimmy because they wanted that insurance. So they're not all of a sudden going to go, okay, Trey didn't look good, off you go, Jimmy. Like, it's not going to happen unless they come in with like a first or something, and they've got to go, well, you know what, we'll risk it.
Right. Yeah. So I think in the next few days we'll know, probably by Friday. I would be shocked if they didn't put Dak Prescott on IR. Like I said, that's holding a roster spot for somebody that you could go out and bring another player in. But I honestly, right now, the top pick as an external option would maybe be like Mason Rudolph or Gardner Minshew in Philadelphia. Kind of those but these guys that have had starter experience. I think would be their top priority. I don't think that those would cost them that much. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he retired this offseason, but maybe if the Cowboys call him up and say, hey, you want to come and play again, maybe he'll come back. But I like I said, I think that without Dak, Philadelphia, it's their division right now to win. So, I mean, they scored a ton of points against Detroit. They let Detroit back in that game, but Jalen Hurts played pretty good. So, if Dak's out for 8 weeks, they really need to play well to keep pace with Philadelphia. Philadelphia, you would hope, after these 8 weeks would be, 5-3, 6-2, something like that. And for the Cowboys to be in striking distance of that without Dak, they need to go 500, basically. And without him, do they do that? So, I don't know. But outside that, so we have the big injuries from Prescott with his throwing hand, Watt with his pec. Quay Walker in Green Bay, he was hurt. I'm not sure the latest on him. But there was a lot of injuries in this week that have changed a lot of division races, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, everything else, there were definitely a few surprises there in terms of, winning teams and that, and how they performed. Like, the Cardinals, I didn't think they'd beat the Chiefs, but I didn't think they'd perform that badly. But I think the only other real standout for me was the Broncos and the Seahawks. As we talked about on our preview show, I had the Broncos winning and winning big, but the fact that the Seahawks won, but just some of the not taking a time out and letting it run down for that monster kick, which it was like they thought they were, back in Denver and could take advantage of the.
From what I read, McManus told them from kicking pregame that 46 is the limit. If they get to the 46-yard line, they'll kick. Mm-hmm. But even Peyton Manning, how do you not at least take a timeout right then to think about it?
Exactly. Take a timeout.
If that would have been the second longest field goal in NFL history had he made it. Now, he did have the leg on it, and it did look pretty good, but it's so long that ball really starts to... Those are the type of kicks where the balls move late because they're dying out, they're spinning funny.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you take a timeout there because if you don't get the 4th and 5 and you don't get the field goal, you lose anyway. So do you have more confidence in your kicker making the second longest field goal in NFL history, or the quarterback you just traded a huge amount for and gave him a bunch of money to convert a 4th and 5? I think you
that's
go with
exactly
Russ.
my point. Like, yeah, exactly. But I mean, you take the time out so you can talk to your kicker and you go, how confident are you? But also you have that time to talk to Russ and ask him, how you feeling about the game, and can you get that 4th and 5? But more importantly, you don't trade all that capital for a player as good as Russell Wilson if you don't trust him to get you 5 and 4 and 5. Like, you don't. None of that made sense whatsoever.
And what I think surprised them was, I think they were anticipating either getting a first down on that 3rd down and long or only picking up a few yards. Had one of those two options happened, the game is continuing with the offense out there. But because on that play, the running back made a play, juked and made a play to get, 5-6 more yards, they got to the 46, and Hackett, I think, sort of panicked. We got where we needed to get. We don't need a first down. Our kicker kicked all pregame. They told us 46. I think it just sort of shocked them. They didn't anticipate them getting that close to a first down. It was either they were going to throw a ball and get a first down by a lot, or Russ was going to get sacked, or the dump off would only pick up a few yards. So honestly, it was kind of worst case scenario for them on that 3rd down play to how much yard the running back got. Obviously, it still brought them into field goal range, but again, you take a timeout there, because either way, if he's missing it, you could technically, I think, because they would have still had 2 timeouts, they might have been able to get the ball back with a few seconds left, whereas now that you let the clock drain, even though he was kind of a dick and called his 2 timeouts after each kneel, there's no chance you get the ball back. So take your timeout. If you're going to kick then. You miss it, you try to stop them on 1st and 2nd down, use your timeouts, hopefully stop them on 3rd down, because they're definitely going to run the ball. They're not going to throw because they want the clock to start. And they punt it with maybe, 15, 10 seconds left, and you try a Hail Mary with Russ or something, or some sort of play. But it just was such a bad decision to not take a timeout there.
Yeah, and that's it. It all comes down to the timeout, because if you take the timeout, you leave yourself time on the clock for a Hail Mary play if you can get it back. But the most important thing is, like, it's one thing, okay, the guy's kicking well before the game, and, they tell you 46 is his limit. But, like, in that kind of scenario, you need to have that time to have the conversation, because he's been kicking in game. He knows how it's feeling. He knows and I would be surprised if if his answer wasn't like, well, I prefer it a bit closer. And I'm surprised that and especially with the type of leader, Wilson is, I'm sure he would have been saying, I can get us the first. You know what I mean?
And
like, it was just bad.
Even with 20 seconds left, let's say they let the clock run down and they take that timeout. It was 20 seconds when they finally took a timeout. If you go for that 4th and 5 and you pick up 6 yards, he probably makes that field goal. So you still had 2 timeouts left. So if Russ is able to hit a wide receiver, because you have the whole field to you in those plays because you have timeouts, you would have gotten him closer, and the Broncos probably most definitely would have won. It was that was a fun game to watch. There was so much emotion that the Seattle Seahawks were playing with. You could tell they really wanted to beat Russell Wilson. Both offense and defense played pretty good. The offense didn't play that great for Seattle in the second half, but the defense, they got 2 turnovers when the Broncos were at the 1-yard line, which was huge. So you can clearly tell that this was it felt like a playoff game, honestly. The way the crowd was into it, the way the Seahawks were playing. This was a great game to watch. When I first saw this, I went, okay, well, Denver's just going to go and blow them out. It's kind of going to be a boring Monday Night Football game, but it was not. It was a really fun game to watch. But just to circle back, like we said, you put the ball in Russell's hands. It's such a long field goal. You're most likely not going to get it. I think McManus hadn't hit any from 64 plus or something. I saw a tweet. So you let Russell try to pick up that at least 5 or 6 yards. You don't even have to throw it deep. Just pick up 5 to 10 more yards, and you win that game most likely.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, and there were all those missed kicks. So we had McPherson get that extra point blocked. He pulled the 29-yarder. Boswell boinked a 55-yarder. Had it been a 54-yarder, it probably goes in, but because it was 55, it just went a little bit too far and hit. But he came back and drilled that 53-yarder to win, which confident that he probably, because he's a really good bounce back kicker. We had a great game with New Orleans and Atlanta, where Saints came all the way back. They kicked a field goal to take the lead, and then they blocked Atlanta's field goal at the end. You had Randy Bullock miss a 49-yarder for the Tennessee Titans. You had Brandon McManus miss. Who else? I know we had a couple more misses. The Jacksonville's kicker missed a field goal at the end of the second half, which would have been enough points to probably beat the Commanders. You also had Blankenship for the Colts miss a 42-yarder, which is a pretty makeable field goal nowadays for these kickers, in overtime to allow the Texans and the Colts to tie. So it was such a weird week where a lot of these games came down to kickers, and the kickers didn't really deliver. In some games they did, but that's what you really need a good kicker, especially in the NFL right now with more parity in the league, I think. A lot of games will come down to that last second field goal kick, and you really need to have confidence in them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was, but I think that is the theme. It was a really weird.
I think the kickers will bounce back. It just seems like one of those things. You know what I mean? Like just one of those weird weeks. I think McPherson will. I mean, earlier in the game, McPherson hit a franchise record 59-yarder that would have been good, I swear, from 70. It was 59 yards, and it seemed to still be going up when it passed through the uprights. He drilled it dead center. It probably would have been the longest field goal in NFL history if it was a little further back. And then you have a guy hit a 59-yarder and miss a 29-yarder. So it was it was crazy, but it was an awesome week of football to sit down and watch. We haven't really touched on it. The Rams. The Bills, everybody has picked to go to the Super Bowl, and they looked like a Super Bowl team on Thursday night. They kicked the shit out of the Rams. Josh Allen had a great game. Their defense had a great game. They look like the contender that we all thought they would be. And outside of that, I think the biggest disappointment would have probably been the Titans for losing to the Giants. That was a big upset. Any other game, I don't think there was really an upset in my mind. I mean, the Colts should have beaten the Texans, but the Titans really, I think, didn't take advantage of a bad opponent to get an early season win. So,
I agree.
All right, so that was week 1 in the 2022 NFL season. I'm excited for week 2. If games continue to play like this, it'll be very fun. But thank you for joining us here. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Please leave a comment on how you thought week 1 went. And I hope you have a nice day.
See you next time.